So there's a real movement out there. I mean, there's a lot of great stories to tell, but the sports are quite exciting, and I know IPC is sort of, for good or for bad, working towards that, making it exciting for TV. People like me keep on breaking their backs. So there's, you can read it, and there's opportunities. But have you been there? You know, the big thing is we're going towards Toronto, and we're gonna see a lot more media, and we're doing a lot of the same thing. We've set really great goals there, and then that'll roll right into Sochi or into Rio. Promoting the Olympic brand, we have speakers for athletes, and the CPC hires everybody, and we go out and do speeches for sponsors, for schools, for interest groups and whatnot, and CPC manages that through their managers, whether it's advertising, sponsorship, athlete relations. Kim McLaughlin generally runs that, and it's pretty good. It's nominal payment, but it keeps you on your toes, and it really inspires the kids and sort of educates people what our sports are all about. Further to that, we go into the schools, and it's quite interesting because you get everything from, say, for example, I'm 40% paralyzed below the waist, and I can't run and jump, and as soon as you say that, every kid puts up their hands, and that's all they want to see. So you show them, and you know, they want to know how you get injured, and I'd be dead if I wasn't wearing a helmet snowboarding that day. So, you know, you can, depending on the audience, whether you're talking to 22-year-olds or 8-year-olds, you just adopt to it. There's a new thing within promoting the brand, and that all affects all of our athletes and athlete services. It's changing minds, changing lives. Again, further professional development program that educates people sports and physical activity. So a lot of that is going into sort of not just sort of talking to schools, but talking about how you can, especially go to hospitals and rehab, how sport can improve your quality of living, and then ideally we'd find new athletes. The CPC has developed a toolbox on how we deal with media, engage with social media, and presentation templates. So similar to what AthletesCAN here has been providing, they provide similar opportunities, or they will turn back, and we work, I think the CPC works a lot with the AthletesCAN board and staff on a lot of things. I think there's a good relationship there. And similarly, I think it's sort of like everyone's out there working, so if we're all a bunch of fingers and we're able to work together as a fist, we get things done, and there's no need to replicate something. So if someone needs some speaking and they don't get a hold of me or AthletesCAN, then and they're getting a hold of CPC, well, they'll probably say, well, through AthletesCAN, you can do the Dale Carnegie public speaking program. So I think there's a good overlay there. So if you have any more questions, you can contact me, Tyler Mosher, and Kim McLaughlin. So it's pretty interesting. I'm really excited for the next 12 years for our brand, for the Canadian Paralympic Committee. The new CEO and president, I can't, and staff, executive directors, I can't speak to better people. Usually in this environment, as a representative or a council member, I'm ready to go into battle every time, and unfortunately or fortunately, well, I guess fortunately, I'm always good for, I should have been a trial lawyer or something, but they don't fight back. You present your case, it's like, well, I recognize that there weren't athletes on the new councils because and I said there has to be, and I said why, and there was a little pushback, and then I said, you know, you have to do this because you're athlete-centered, and if you don't, let's figure out a reason why there's a bit of a pushback. And they're just like, okay, on some areas we might not have an athlete, you know, that would be presented, and then I'd say, well, you just go through us, and we'll look at your recommendation, and then you have our well-wishing. I thought that there'd be pushback. Usually our Congress, our AGM is in the spring, and AthletesCAN is in the fall. And I said, you know, I'd really like athletes to be at the Congress because a lot of decision making is done there, and it's the one time where all the NSOs are together with that, and they said, yeah, that's a good idea. We'll start bringing athletes to that so that you can achieve your goals of engagement. So it's really great. It's a really great athlete-centered overarching group. They work well with Sport Canada, and so I'm really proud to be part of it. If you guys have any questions, just let me know. I mean, the great thing is that our membership isn't big, so I think it's quite manageable, and the landscape's becoming as such as, cliche level playing field, but usually for those of you that are, and there's 3 groups of athletes here. There's national team members, of which we all are, but not all of us are Paralympic or Olympic, so it's sort of like the big brother, the big fist is the Olympic Committee, and then CPC, and then the other athletes. And I think in the landscape now, everyone's being really treated equal. And AthletesCAN has been a lot about that because as athletes, everyone's treated equal. It's just sort of at a decision-making point of view, it's sometimes not, and that's really changing. Thanks very much.
Good morning, everyone. Name is Nathaniel Miller, former water polo player. Actually, I say former, but this summer I dusted off my Speedo and competed in the World Masters Championships. Yeah, well, I'm glad you're laughing, because I wasn't. It was all sorts of ugly, but I give it a try. First off, I just want to lead off by saying a very sincere and heartfelt thank you. I mean, I was sitting there on those tables about 10 years ago. Victoria, Ash, Victoria was 10 years ago, 2004. My first AthletesCAN conference. Like you, bushy-tailed and bright-eyed and eager to be a leader. I didn't know what it really meant, what does it mean to be a leader in the sports system, but I was going to show up and be a part of it, especially after the first night of celebrations with the other leaders in the group. I thought, this is fantastic. But no, seriously, thank you for taking the time away from your training, away from, for those of you that aren't active in competing, away from your lives, away from your families, to be here, to share, to learn, and to try to give back to sport and be leaders in the sport community. It is so fundamentally important, and as you saw last night, you heard last night, and I hope you'll hear a little bit today, you do make a difference. You do make a difference when you put your hand up and you say, yes, I want to be a leader, I want to impact change, whether it's in my sport federation, in my community, or if you're dreaming even bigger than that, if it's across Canada or even internationally. So thank you for taking the time and being willing to be here, but understand that when you put your hand up, that's only the first step. The first step is putting your hand up, is showing up. After that, it's the accountability of following up. And I know that all of you are going to follow up and take the learnings that you have here and share them with the other athletes in your sport so you can help them become leaders and help them help you have a bigger impact. Now, I realize a lot of you wear a lot of different hats, and I do as well, and I'd be remiss if I didn't take a quick minute to talk to you very quickly about one of the other hats that I wear that's not directly COC, and that's as the chair of the Athlete Council for Toronto 2015. Does everybody know what Toronto 2015 is? Everybody in the room? Does anybody not know what it is? Okay, good. That's a great, very important first step. The only thing I want to get across to you is that whether you are in a Pan-American sport, a para-sport, or an Olympic sport in the Pan-American Games, you have to understand how important the Pan-American Games in Toronto are for all of us, for everybody in the sports system. Why? Very simple, and Adam identified it very clearly last night. We need to have a market on top of the passion and the skills. There's a ton of passion here, there's a ton of skills. The Pan Am Games is the second biggest sporting event in the world after the Summer Games. And it's taking place in the largest media market in our country, the fourth largest media market in North America. Those games need to be a success for sport and for all of us, because coming out of those games, if they are the success that a lot of people are working very hard to make it, then for all of us, summer, winter, Commonwealth sport, para sport, for all of us, we'll have a bigger market to go out and have an impact after those games. So if anything you can do to support that, whether it's just retweeting something that they have on social media, or whether it's encouraging your teammates to get involved, there's going to be a torch relay for those of you in Ontario coming up in the next few months. Anything you do to be involved, to spread the word, to spread the excitement about it, whether you're going to be competing or not, it is so important for all of us in the sports system, and I really implore you to get engaged. Now, before I jump directly into athlete services and what we do, I wanted to also identify, you heard him speak yesterday, Jeff Christie. Jeff, can you just stand up quickly? So Jeff Christie, as you mentioned yesterday, is the chair of the Athlete Commission, or the Athlete Council at the COC. And it's really important that you understand, we hope to have him talk here today, but for the sake of time, we decided to just let me talk about it. They're working on a new initiative to really find a better way of getting your voice directly connected to the Athlete Council. And then the Athlete Council, you have to understand, does have a direct link into the Canadian Olympic Committee's board, okay? And I was involved for a long time in sport, a long time as an athlete, as an advocate. In the last year of working for the COC, I started working there a year ago, my eyes have been opened bright. I understand now that the athlete voice is directly involved in the decision-making at the COC. The board of directors that guides everything that the COC does is made up of a lot of very successful, very passionate individuals, including some former Olympic or retired Olympic athletes, and they come to us regularly. They come to the AC regularly asking for recommendations so that they can have that athlete voice in their decision-making. So once the AC rolls out that direct link with you, the athlete reps, make sure that you engage with them, that you bring your concerns, you bring your issues to those reps so that they can accurately speak your voice at the board level, because those decisions do get made with that input. Now, talking about the COC. So as I mentioned, coming in there about a year ago, one thing I gotta stress, like I said, I got my start in athlete leadership here at AthletesCAN. Bob, who I've had a lot of conversations with over the years, and I'm thrilled that he still smiles at me because sometimes I probably grilled him a little bit unfairly. And those of you who know me, I'm a pretty stubborn guy. My first AthletesCAN, sat there like you guys watching a COC member come up and talk about the decision to support the NSFs that were limiting some of the athletes who had qualified by the international standards to go to the Olympic Games. They were limiting the spots under this theory that we want to have a smaller, tight team with only athletes that meet a higher standard. And they were trying to sell us that line of thinking, while on the flip side, for the Torino Games and the Winter Games, they were opening the floodgates and getting as many athletes as possible into it so that we could build up towards 2010. Like a very big gap in logic, and I was sitting there next to the boxers who had missed out on the Olympic chance, grilling that guy from the COC about that decision. So for me to be standing here 10 years later as a COC employee does feel a little bit weird. But the reality is, when I went into my interview there, when I applied for the job, I did it out of a combination of factors, and to be honest, I wasn't at all sure that I wanted the job, because I didn't want to go and work for stuff that I didn't believe in. And if you looked at my Twitter and you looked at my Facebook, you would have seen lots of commentary over the years that was not very flattering towards the COC. And it was very important for me that my bosses knew that, because I didn't want them digging later on and finding out, like, oh, we shouldn't have hired this guy. And in that interview process, I went through a whole bunch of different hurdles, and at the last stage, I sat down with Chris Overhold, the CEO of the Canadian Olympic Committee. And the conversation I thought was going to start with me telling him, like, look, I'm not coming here to be a patsy. I'm not coming here to be the athlete face of whatever you guys do. I'm coming here to help make things better for athletes. It didn't start that way. It started with him saying, what do we have to do better, and how are you going to help me make things better for athletes? Okay, and he's slick. If you've ever heard Chris talk, I mean, he was MLSE Sports. He worked with the Miami Dolphins. The guy is sport business at the highest level, incredible communicator, and you can feel that. So at the beginning, I was a little bit apprehensive. Like, I wanted to believe him, but he was so smooth. I'm like, all right, well, okay, I'll give it a go, and we'll see. And I can tell you, that's better. I can tell you, a year into it, I am more than convinced that he meant every bit of that. And I mean, Carl's had an opportunity to be on a few calls with him. Chris is 100% committed to improving the situation for athletes across the board. And when I say athletes across the board, it really isn't just about Olympic athletes or Olympians. It goes much broader than that, and that's the big dream and the big goal to be for the COC to be a true leader in the entire sports system. Okay? We have to understand that there are stakeholders, and there are silos, and there are different focuses, and the COC can't be doing everything for everyone. The CPC, as Tyler illustrated, is doing some amazing things. Game Plan and the sports institutes are doing great things, but the COC, as the big brother or the carrying the biggest stick, has an incredible opportunity to help play a leadership role in that collaboration, in that partnership, and Chris is at the forefront of that, pushing us, challenging us to do a better job on that front. on a daily basis. And so that for me, again, has been very refreshing. And coming into the COC, the other thing I think I'd share with you is that the Canadian Olympic Committee is now about 85 people. Okay? And of that 85, there are seven of us that are retired Olympians. The rest of them are all Olympic fans, and I would say even some of them Olympic nuts. Okay? That passion and excitement for the Olympic values and for sport is something that the COC as an organization understands and takes full advantage of. If you drive by René Lévesque in downtown Montreal, where our offices are, you will rarely drive by at 8 o'clock in the morning without seeing a bunch of people hard at work, even though they're supposed to start at 9 o'clock. And you'll rarely see an empty office at 5:30 or 6 o'clock, even though technically we're supposed to end at 5. Okay? The people on a weekly basis, I get comments and just excitement from some of my colleagues who are talking about that new project they're working on and the impact it's going to have on athletes. Like these people behind the logistics team, behind the digital team, behind the branding team, these people really care about sport and are really excited about helping you be better athletes, helping you become better leaders. And for us, it's really exciting because, as athletes, like that's right in our wheelhouse. Like they love supporting us, which is, it's a great environment to work in. Going down the line then, the Athlete Services and Marketing Department at the COC, the team that I manage, which is myself, Marie-Ève Marleau. Marie-Ève, can you stand up? She was a diver in the 2008 Games. And Tanya Vincent, not Vincent, just get that in your head, 4-time Olympian, 4-time medalist in the sport of long track speed skating. We also have Olia... Short track, sorry. Oh, I'm going to pay for that one tomorrow. Oya Ovchinnikova, who's a fencer, also works with us. And we have Julia Mahoney, who's also a fencer, who works with us. And Sandra Sassine, who is also a fencer, a lot of fencers, who also works with our group. So our team, essentially, we manage all the services and programs that the COC does for athletes. And, in a nutshell, my boss on the sports side, Carolyn Asalian, once we got going, I kind of asked her, like, okay, so, technically, directly, what am I going to be working on? And she looked at me and she said, well, your job is to make sure you have a voice and you have an impact on everything that has to do with athletes that the COC does. I thought, okay, that's cool. And then I thought about it. The Canadian Olympic Committee, everything we do is about athletes. So you tell me we have to be involved in everything? And she looked at me and she said, yep. And so us as a team, we bust our butts trying to be involved and have a say and help influence the direction of all the programming across every part of our organization. And I can tell you again, because of the passion and the excitement that the different department heads have, it's not a battle. It's not a fight to convince other departments that, hey, you got to consider how this is going to impact athletes or how this is going to impact their training. No, it's not a battle at all. It's a, hey, are we doing the right thing? Is this going to work? Is this going to support them? Are they going to like this? And when it's like, hey, it's going to be $750 to go race BMWs around a track, yeah, they're going to like that. They're going to love that. As an example, then the last year, in 2013, the COC, through Marie-Ève, who handles our relations and marketing side of things, we booked over 930 athlete appearances. Okay, now those 930 athlete appearances, some of them are community events that are pro bono, that are charity events with some partnerships, and we try to reach out to athletes who have an interest in certain causes and connect them to events in their community, kind of like that Kevin Bacon example, but also corporate events with some of our partners. And last year alone, over $378,000 went directly into the pockets of athletes by going to these different various events. And I know in saying that number, some of you are sitting there going, oh yeah, but that's only for the high-profile athletes, only for the targeted athletes. I know you're thinking that because me as a water polo player in a have-not sport who was married to a track and field athlete who was a targeted athlete, I saw that on a regular basis for most of my career. What I can tell you unequivocally is that with our team, we make sure whenever there's an open call opportunity, we do reach out across the spectrum. And I can tell you that of those 938 events, I don't have the exact numbers, but a whole whack of them went to athletes from a variety of sports, that whether they're high-profile, podium-winning sports or sports that aren't really on the roadmap in the Canadian consciousness yet. So I say that to you to understand that we are constantly working to try to level the playing field or provide opportunities across the board. But in doing that, we're not trying to bring the bar down so that it's the same for everyone. We're trying to raise the bar up so that everybody gets more access to opportunities and more access to funding, more access to ways to put money in their pocket so that you can be athletes longer, so that you can be more successful leaders in your community. So that's kind of one side of the operations and stuff we do on. The other stuff is performance, and that's what Tanya leads up. And so that's all it has to do with games prep, preparing the athlete village, preparing the athlete lounge in the athlete village, career transition workshops, Olympic preparation series, all of those events. And again, you know, the COC in the last 4 or 5 years has done a much better job in the branding and marketing area, which has meant a lot more money coming in. But I can tell you directly that also means a lot more money going out. As a small example, the Post-Olympic Excellence Series, that was my first big project I had to work on. And when I walked in there, we took a look at the budget, we took a look at things, we said, okay, the last 4 poses have been about 30 athletes. That's not good enough. We have to do better. This year we had 70 athletes at pose. And the next pose, we're looking to improve on that number as well. So we are really trying to expand the reach of all that programming. And that leads me into the last thing I wanted to talk about, which is the most exciting project that I've been working on over the last 5 or 6 months. And it's in a very direct partnership with Carl and before him, Andreanne at Game Plan. And it's got a lot of different names. And the reality is we haven't really closed the loop yet. But the bottom line is that it started with this vision of total athlete wellness. The idea that, okay, there's performance, and there's performance in terms of your training, your sports psych, your physio, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in that, I think, you know, in Canada, we're starting to do a really good job. But then there's this whole other whack of stuff, which is mental health, which is career transition, which is alumni, which is skill building, some of the stuff you do here at this forum, which is networking skills, public speaking skills, all the things, all the different things that are going to help you have a successful transition and be able to continue being a leader, a sport leader, long after you hang up your skates or you hang up your Speedo. That initiative, so essentially we're working with our partner Deloitte, and they did an audit or a review of the entire ecosystem of all the services and programs that are available to athletes in Canada with the idea that, okay, we got to take a look at everything that's out there, find out where the gaps are, and then start identifying what kind of programs we have to put in place to solve for. And of course, when Deloitte came in as one of the most successful consulting firms in the world, they were looking at it and trying to solve the problem for a business, one company that maybe has lots of different divisions, and how do we make sure we're leveraging things and not doubling things and getting the most value for the dollars invested in programming. It took them a while, even though we tried to explain to them at the beginning, but they finally came to understand that our system is way more screwed up than that. It's not one company that can direct and guide what things are. No, it's a whole bunch of different players. The CPC, the COC, Commonwealth Games Canada, Game Plan, the sports institutes. And the sports institutes themselves, even though they have a committee that brings them together, are really 7 different entities. And each of those entities have their own partners and their own stakeholders and their own mandates. And so in that quagmire of different egos and personalities and funding partners and stakeholders, how do you then service the clients, and that's what we are as athletes in that language, we're the clients. How do we service them across the board at a high level with such a complicated ecosystem? And I'm really, really excited today. I can't give you the full role of the program because we're not quite there yet, but essentially Game Plan is going to be that one window, and over the next year or two, we're going to start driving you there for your access to everything, so that everything, every service and every program that's available, you'll be able to access through Game Plan, and then through that portal you'll go off to, if you're an Olympic athlete, it'll drive you to these COC programs or CPC, but in a nutshell, it's really bringing that all together, and then again, identifying and establishing a baseline of support that every athlete should have access to. And then over time, how do we continue to ratchet up the quality of that programming? And one of those programs, as a small example of that, is our public speaking workshop, which those of you that are in the Olympic window right now, you would have seen the emails. Some of you, Nathan, I know, is in that program. We'll be seeing you next week. Where's Nathan? There he is. Anybody else in the room that's going to be in that? No. But that program, that pilot, we're running it. We're running it COC style, if you will, and we're going out and getting a really good facilitator. I think we've built a really good program. But the idea is that we have the funding to run a great program for Olympians. We're going to run it. We're going to test it. And then after that, if it proves out right, and if we are successful in helping these athletes become much better speakers at the end of the program, then that model is something that will then work with our partners in the sports centers to deliver it across the country so that they're delivering the exact same model. So that's where the COC can play a leadership role in using some funding to develop and design the best possible programs, and then helping our partners in the sports institutes with the CPC develop the exact same model and deliver it to their constituents, which is, again, you, the athletes, regardless of which hat or which silo you fall under. So those are the kind of projects and programs we're working on. I didn't want to give you a PowerPoint and start listing it all out because really there are a ton of them. And I love to talk. So I'm here all weekend. If you want more information about what the COC is doing, come find me. Just be ready to talk because as Scott or Tom or anyone else can identify, you know, I can corner you and we can go until 4 or 5 in the morning and you still have to be here tomorrow morning bright and early to keep learning together. So that's it in a nutshell. Did I miss anything? No, we're pretty good. One last little tidbit. One last little tidbit. It's a bit of a personal thing or whatnot, but again, I mentioned when I came in here 10 years ago, I was sitting on the other side and, you know, playing in a sport with an NSF that, as diplomatically as I can say, had its challenges, okay, and a lot of frustrations, and then watching some of the decision making and not liking it and really pointing that finger like, hey, you guys are not supporting us. You guys are not doing things properly. You guys need to do things better. A lot of pointing, a lot of anger, and understandably, because as athletes, there's a lot of passion. You put your bodies on the line, you risk injury, and you do it for no financial security, no pension plan, no guarantee that when you come out of it, you're going to be taken care of. So when a coach or an HPD or a CEO or a board member makes a decision that directly hurts you and your chance to go to a games or your chance to go to an event, of course it hurts, and of course you get angry. I understand that. I understand that probably as well as or better than most because my career ended right at the peak of it because I didn't have the support I needed to keep going. I understand that frustration. And I'm not here to tell you that all of your NSFs are perfect, that the COC is perfect, the CPC is perfect. But what I've really come to learn, especially in the last year, is that at the end of the day, the people on the other side, the Bob Prices of the world, the directors of the CPC, the directors of the COC, none of them are in it to get you, the individual. None of them are in it to try to make it worse for you, the individual. They themselves have difficult decisions to make, and sometimes those decisions mean that they're going to negatively affect you because in that year or in that cycle, it's going to mean less funding or less opportunity to go somewhere. And sometimes those decisions are wrong because they don't have enough information, because us as athlete leaders haven't done enough job to collect that information and to effectively share it to make them understand what the problems are. But that's where the ownership is on us, not to point the finger, not to push back, not to find all the faults with our NSFs and with our other funding or partners. Our job is to reach out and reach our hands out to them and say, hey, how can I help you do a better job at solving the problems that we've identified? How can we work together to support each other so that we have a stronger system? And maybe it might mean that this decision right now is going to hurt me as an athlete, me directly. And that's a tough pill to swallow. But if you come at it with the idea and the understanding that people on the other side are just as passionate as you and just as committed and driven, and maybe their bodies aren't on the line, maybe they haven't had 10 surgeries like you have, and maybe their stake isn't quite the same as yours, okay, fine. But don't complain. Don't point a finger. Work with them. Help them understand that their decisions were the right one. Help them come to a better decision. And it might not help you directly in the moment, but as Adam so eloquently pointed out yesterday, in giving back, in helping for the next generation, you will get so much more. And even if you walk away and your sport career doesn't finish on the high that you wanted it to, if you're giving back and you're helping make the system better, then you will never, ever, ever regret your career. You'll never walk away with that negative feeling or that feeling that it wasn't a good thing. You'll view it as a tough lesson, a hard lesson, but something that helped you grow as an individual and helped you give back to make it better for other people. And that is powerful. I mean, I really believe that's what life is all about. And I don't mean to be preachy, but it's an important thing because, again, the NSFs, they are in a tough situation and sometimes get pushed and make decisions that aren't good for us, the athletes, but they're doing it out of what they think is best. So how do we help them better understand that maybe some of those decisions aren't good? Okay? That's it. Come talk to me on the weekend. Come talk to Mary-Eve, come talk to Tanya, and yeah, enjoy.
And he can speak that fast in French also, so. Thanks. I think they left me 3 minutes. While they're getting my presentation loaded up, I think the first rule of public speaking is you have to say something 3 times in order to create an image in the mind, and I think he used the word Speedo twice. So I've added the 3rd one, so now you have the picture in your mind. I have a son who's a retired national level swimmer, so I live amongst the Speedos, or I did for many years. My name's Carl Repp. I am the national manager of Game Plan, a very unique program that I just want to I will take 15 minutes only to speak to you about. I am a former high school principal. I was a principal for 14 years, so if you're texting in the back, Roz, people out there, I'll know that you're doing that because I have that uncanny sense. So hopefully I can keep your attention for 15 minutes. I'm a former national athlete. I was a hockey player, also a professional hockey player. I'm in my 25th year of retirement from sport as a player. But I very recently watched my son as a 20-year-old go through a very difficult transition out of high-performance sport and watched him with the same struggles that I had 25 years ago. That finding a sense of identity, finding what else I wanted to do in my life. So it affects all of us. And if you're heading into retirement sometime in the next 10 to 15 years as an athlete, you'll probably feel those things too. And Game Plan, which is my button. Game Plan is a program that its inception was about 2 years ago, and I think Andre Ann and Andy Van Utegem came and spoke here 2 years ago about the possibility of a plan. And I'm really happy to say that 2 weeks ago we did a soft launch or a virtual launch of Game Plan, which included the website. So if you want to see Nathaniel again speaking in French very quickly on a screen, you can come over to our corner booth sometime today and have a look at that. We also have a number of other speakers that are telling their stories. Kyle Schufelt is also on there. There's a number of other people. Jeff Christie will be on there soon. We're implementing them slowly as we bring in the stories, so people go back and they see some new faces. So come and see it. Come and check out the website and see what the program's about. I'm going to tell you a little bit about it right now. Game Plan was initiated in response to the needs identified by athletes, coaches, and sports system stakeholders in the 2010 Olympic Games debrief report and in the business report to address life-sport integration during a sport career and enhance life after your sport. Game Plan, Canada's National Athlete Career Transition Program, supports and empowers high-performance athletes to pursue excellence during and beyond their sporting careers. We want to take a proactive approach. I'm just having troubles with my technology. There we go. And the difference between the programs that we have, that Game Plan today, and what you've seen in the past, is that it's performance enhancing. It's to support transitioning athletes to achieve life sport integration without compromising their sport-related goals. So in the CSI program, we don't put this under athlete services, we put it under performance services, because there's a lot of comparisons out there internationally and some studies that show that having a better sport life integration can improve performance in a number of ways, which I'll go into in a little bit. The other thing that this program wants to do is they want to put experts on the ground. We want to have people in centers and in regions that have expertise in career transition or in athlete transition. And we've done that so far with 5 athlete career transition advisors. So the couple places that don't have them yet are Atlantic and Manitoba, but we are working in putting people in those places. But in the other CSI network centers, you will find people who have master's degrees or PhDs in counseling and specifically in career transition or in transition. So those resources are on the ground. And we wanted to put those in first before we even had the launch of the program, so that when the program began, there was somebody that you could go to as athletes to talk to about transition. We also wanted to make sure that it empowered athletes to proactively participate and effectively manage their own careers, education, and personal development needs. So as a group of athletes, you usually have a posse of people around you who are helping organize your world, whether it be nutrition, whether it be physio, whether it be biomechanics, whether it be your coaching, scheduling, all those different things. But at some point in your life, athletes are going to do a transition into where those people start to drop off, and they have to start taking care of the things on their own. And being able to empower athletes to do that is a bit of a challenge, because they're so busy during their training years that they don't have time to take care of those. So Game Plan wants to bring some of those pieces to you at the right times when they aren't interfering with your sport, but to give athletes a chance to understand those things and to get better at them. One of the other things that Game Plan wants to do is to be very innovative. We want to keep an eye on places like England and Australia that sort of led the world in these types of programs, and continue to study and research career transition or athlete transition and bring those to Canada in a Canadian way. So how does it fit into the ecosystem of sport in Canada? And use those to continue to develop Game Plan. One of the unique things about Game Plan is that it isn't just a CSI program. It isn't a CSI program at all, other than for the delivery, but it is a partnership with Sport Canada, with the CPC and the COC. And that makes it unique for the CSI programs, at least, in that it's one of the first programs that brings together the CSI network to deliver one program under one umbrella to athletes nationally. And we really are thankful for the support of CPC, COC, and Sport Canada in making this program a national program. And I think it's the first of many that you'll see. As I'm sure many of you have done transition from Ontario to BC or from Calgary to Toronto, you'll find that the CSI network can be very different when you arrive there. So this is one of those programs that where it doesn't matter where you go in Canada as a national athlete, you'll be provided with the same service. So to enhance the personal development of Canada's elite athletes by providing expert-based resources and insight that athletes need to transition into, within, and beyond their sporting careers is the vision of Game Plan. I just want to take a second to talk a little bit about transition as an athlete. People think of transition as retirement, and that's really not what it's about. It's really about all those different transitions that you're going to have, whether it be from a provincial athlete to a national athlete, from a national athlete to an Olympic athlete, from a position of being injured or being selected to a team, from having a child to being deselected. All those are transitions, and all those will have a meaningful impact on your life beyond just being an athlete. So when we talk about transition, we're talking about a much bigger picture than just retirement. So try and think of that when you think of Game Plan. Try and think about your world as an athlete or your colleagues that you're going to go back and speak to about the transitions they're going through and what that might be like for them. Some of the career planning benefits that Game Plan will bring are a reduced burnout rate resulting from a singular focus. If you only identify yourself as an athlete, and many of you do from the time you're 5 or 6 years old until you're 22, 23, 35, 38 years old, if you only identify as that, it's going to leave you hanging when it does come time to retirement or when there is an injury or when you have to do a transition or a shift. We also don't want an athlete sitting in the Olympic Games on a Wednesday and thinking to themselves, I'm going to compete tomorrow, and then I'm going to wake up next Monday because I've already made the decision to retire after these Olympics, and I don't know what I'm going to do, because that's not going to help your performance on Thursday. So the idea is to get these little small increments of skills and understandings about your change and your transition prior to that time. If you can focus on your sport when you need to focus on your sport and not have the stress of the change and the transition in your brain prior to your competition or during your competitive years, then it's going to create a stronger overall athletic performance for you. There's no doubt about that. There's a lot of research that shows that. So that's one of the important features of this program. Who's eligible? At this point, which will probably change over a short period of time, current or retired Sport Canada carded athletes, retired Sport carded athletes in the past 5 years, athletes who are registered at a Canadian Sport Institute center, Paralympic or Olympic targeted sports through OTP, and pilot identified sports, which there's a number of them right now, and you'll see a list of those if you come and see me at the booth. In one of my other worlds, in my other realms, I'm a change management specialist. And I just want to take a second and talk a little bit more about transition and change. Because changes can either be predictable or non-predictable, you don't know if you're going to have an injury. Well, I guess as athletes, as elite athletes, you're always injured and you're always trying to recover from injury. But you don't know when you're going to receive an injury that's going to change your life. So being prepared and understanding change is very important because everything does change. Change creates fear. And fear is going to result in diminished performance, always. So when you're understanding fear and you're understanding how you change and how you can adapt to change, it's going to increase your performance as an athlete. That's what the importance is of this program. It's not that we're going to give you a speaking seminar or teach you about finance or tell you that you need to learn how to cook for yourself or learn to do your laundry, which I had to teach my son after he got back from university. It's about understanding yourself and how you transition and how you change. So that's why we've put the experts on the ground. That's why we have people that you can go to, make an appointment with, or build a relationship over your sporting career or after your sporting career, so that they can help you through those transitions, understand yourself in transition, so that you can perform and be the best you can, whether it be during your sporting career or even afterwards. The programs that are going to be put in place around networking or around mentoring or around job skills or around building resumes, those are all pieces of it, but really it's about understanding yourself as an athlete and as a person in life beyond being an athlete. So I'm going to ask for a couple of things from you, sort of the call to action, and that is that you actively engage in game plan and you improve your performance in sport and life, and you take the message back to the other athletes that are within your sport, or if you're a retired athlete, you look at game plan and how can you be involved in game plan. We're going to be looking for some athlete ambassadors. We're going to be looking for mentors. We're going to be looking for into the corporate community to connect athletes with areas of interest. So if they decide that they want to be an accountant, we want to make sure that we move them towards somebody who has some experience of transitioning from an athlete into being an accountant. We want to be able to have people who are moving into athlete-friendly universities. So if you're a retired athlete and you're currently working in a university or a college setting and you'd like to come back to game plan and talk about how you can do that, but actively engage in as many ways as you can as an athlete and as a retired athlete into game plan to help build the program. Nathaniel talked a little bit about some of the expanded mandates of game plan, which you're going to see over the next probably over the next couple of years, but some in the short term over the next couple of months. So it's one of those programs that you need to keep your eye on and watch it grow. Go to the website often. Make it the portal that you'll go to get the information that you need for transition as an athlete. The other thing that you can do as a group of athletes or as on athlete councils is make sure that your NSO is asking for funding from OTP for game plan under the other category. Because there are a number of categories that they ask for funding from, and try and receive that support that you'll need from the CSI network and from the athlete career transition advisors through the LOUs that are put together with those groups. So those are some things that you can do as an athlete and as an athlete sitting on an athlete council. I know that Calgary has a contest happening. Some of you know Cara Button. She has put out a call to action to athletes that belong to CSI Calgary, and I believe that you can win an iPad if you set up is that right?
An iPad mini.
An iPad mini. If you actually go to the game plan website, you I think join Twitter. Is it? What are the criteria?
So for all kind of CSI Calgary athletes, we have set up a kind of a contest for you guys. So if you start following Game Plan on Twitter, will see that, and you'll all be entered into a draw to win an iPad mini through our institute as part of your show of support. But we'd also like to see you guys getting your teammates on board, retweeting, favoriting, actually being engaged with the account as well. So just keep that in mind. And Kara and I know who you guys are, so.
And I'll be talking to the athlete career transition advisors in the other centers to see if they can set up a matching program in the other institutes or in the other regions. So please go there, please get involved, please watch the program grow, and please contact your person on the ground in your area to talk more about the program. So thank you.
Sorry, just real quickly, Shay, can you stand up, please? I am, put the spotlight on you. Stand up, yeah. I just want to introduce you to Shay Smith. He's a track and field athlete, also on the athlete commission for the COC. Came here this weekend, really just to meet with you guys and get to know you a little bit to start that process of gathering information. So go and talk to him.
All right, thanks guys. And we are only 3 minutes over, so let's keep moving. This is a miracle. Thank you very much. All right, next session. Actually, before the next session, not to beat a dead horse, just a terrible expression, but dusting off a Speedo is an image that seems so unhygienic to me. It paints a picture, a very vivid picture. Dusting off a Speedo. Anywho. And the Twitter was an excellent segment. I forgot to mention this yesterday. Tweet away. We don't really have an official hashtag, do we, this year? But we do. I don't. AthletesCAN forum or hashtag ACAN forum. We do have an official hashtag. It's ACAN forum 2014. ACAN forum. Oh, I didn't get any emails. And also at AthletesCAN and all that. And I don't know if everyone probably follows Val. He's a great Twitterer. And chilling during KidsCAN was his tweet yesterday, which I liked. So. Anywho, next session. It is with our partners from CCES, the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport. And so they will provide us with an overview of the proposed changes to the 2015 Canadian Anti-Doping Program. We heard Jazz speak about that a little bit yesterday. As well as some of the work CCES has done in collaboration with the Canadian Concussion Collaborative on concussion protocols to improve education about concussions and the implementation of some best practices for the prevention and management of concussions. So some interesting topics. So I would like to welcome up Catherine Henry, Manager of Business Development at the CCES, and Dr. Catherine Schneider, please. Hello, does this still work? You guys. Still good? Yes.
Good morning, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Bien que ma présentation sera en anglais, je suis francophone, je parle français. Alors, avant de commencer, je tiens à remercier AthletesCAN de nous avoir invités et vous tous et toutes aujourd'hui de m'accueillir aujourd'hui. Donc, oui, ma présentation sera en anglais. On a le contenu disponible en français. Ça me fait plaisir de répondre à vos questions en français après la présentation ou au courant de la journée aujourd'hui. Alors, sans plus tarder, as Tom mentioned, the purpose of our presentation and my presence here today is to discuss and review the Canadian Anti-Doping Program, which will come into effect on January 1st, 2015. I'm glad I can be part of the group that speaks about Speedos, as my first image does feature Speedos, so I'm glad about that. So to provide you with a brief overview, I'll say just a few words about the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sports, or the CCS, WADA, the World Anti-Doping Organization, and the Code. The consultation process that took place to get us to this place where we have a new code and we have a new Canadian anti-doping program. And the majority of the talk will be about the new technical and significant changes that are part of the new code, and as a result will be part of the Canadian anti-doping program. And I'll end with some of the next steps and a brief conclusion. So the CCS, as most of you probably know, our organization is founded on the principles of fair play and drug-free sports. We are an independent organization, a national organization, and a not-for-profit organization. And we are responsible for the implementation and management of the Canadian anti-doping program. The World Anti-Doping Agency and the Code, so WADA. WADA is really the organization that establishes the World Anti-Doping Code, and along with a number of international standards that speak to different technical and operational areas in the field of anti-doping. Why does WADA exist? Why does the Code exist? WADA and the Code really provide this framework for anti-doping. They provide a common set of rules in order to make sure that across all sports, across all countries, we follow the same rules, the same processes. And of course, the most important is really to protect the rights of every athlete to compete in a sporting environment that's free from doping. So to get us to this new 2015 code, WADA put together an extensive consultation process, numerous phases, numerous drafts that took into consideration feedback from various countries, various sports, anti-doping organizations, international federations, and athletes. The CCS, along with the Canadian community, participated in this consultation process, so we provided feedback on behalf of the Canadian community to inform this new code. Further, at the end of this consultation process, WADA issued the final version of the code, which was approved in November, and which now needs to be implemented by all countries, all sports. So what we have is this new code, along with, as I mentioned, a number of international standards, like the prohibited list, the international standard for testing and investigations, international standards for laboratories, protection of privacy, therapeutic use exemption. So all of this is what now needs to be implemented and taken into account in the Canadian anti-doping program. So why do we have the Canadian anti-doping program? Why does it exist? Why do we need it? For a majority of sport organizations, it is a requirement from their international federation to have a code-compliant anti-doping program in order to participate in major games, Olympic Games, Paralympic Games. From the Government of Canada, there is a funding policy that requires federally funded sport to adopt the Canadian anti-doping program. But aside from these 2 points, I think from a strong sporting nation, there is a strong consensus in Canada and a collective commitment that as a country, we want sport that is fair and ethical, and we want sport that is doping-free to protect, again, the rights of our clean athletes, and which is what we are here to work together to achieve. So once the code was finalized, the international standards were finalized, the CCS now had the mandate to incorporate and come up with a Canadian anti-doping program that was code compliant and met all the requirements coming from WADA. So we held our own consultation process. The first period was from April to June, where we issued the first draft of the CADP. We held a number of meetings, we had a symposium, we welcomed feedback from sports, athletes. We took into consideration this feedback, produced a second draft that was issued in August. We received further comments, and we will be issuing the final version of the Canadian anti-doping program on Wednesday, October 1st. So from October to December, this final period will be the adoption period, getting familiar with the Canadian Anti-Doping Program for everyone to be ready for implementation on January 1st, 2015. So if I can speak a little bit about the outcomes from the consultation process. What came out of the consultation process is that we want and need a stronger partnership between the CCS and all the sport organization, all the athletes. That we want a meaningful and effective anti-doping program for all Canadians. We want to be able to provide services to all federally funded sport organizations in Canada, which is upwards of 80 sport organizations. In the past, some organizations were receiving very minimal or reduced services. This is no longer acceptable and no longer possible under the new code. This would put us in a non-code compliant position, so we certainly don't want to be in that position. We realized that the 2015 code cost extremely more than the program that we were running in 2009. There's a number of new requirements, and I'll walk you through them in a few minutes, in terms of increased testing, increased analysis, investigation, which means the 2015 Canadian Anti-Doping Program is more expensive to run than the 2009 program that we have. So it forced us to rethink how we deliver anti-doping services in Canada. And notwithstanding the strong support that we get from the Government of Canada, there is a bit of a gap in terms of the funding that we need to be able to provide all those services. So the 2015 Canadian Anti-Doping Program includes an adoption contribution from the sport to contribute to anti-doping in Canada, the details of which will be in the Canadian Anti-Doping Program, have been discussed with sport, and will continue that discussion. I'm happy to discuss this more. I just don't have enough time today to get into the details of this adoption contribution, but happy to field question or discuss throughout the morning. So the Canadian Anti-Doping Program has 3 parts, really. First part deals with the structure and the scope of the program. Second part deals with the implementation process. And the third part is the rules. So really the code and all the international standards that are part of this program. And this is what I'll review with you today, the significant technical revisions that were made to the code and that now have been implemented in the Canadian Anti-Doping Program. In terms of anti-doping rule violations, there are 2 new violations that have been added to the code. A violation that deals with complicity and a violation that deals with prohibited association. In terms of complicity, it means someone who's assisting, aiding someone in either covering up an anti-doping rule violation or someone who would be assisting someone breaching their period of ineligibility. This is now a new anti-doping rule violation. Prohibited association, you've probably heard about that a lot. There's been a lot of high-profile examples of athletes or individuals who continue to work with coaches or doctors that have been sanctioned or that have been criminally charged with an offense for providing performance-enhancing drugs. So this new violation has been added to the code. It means that if an athlete or someone continues to be associated with that person after having been notified, anti-doping rule violation. In terms of whereabouts strikes, there's a change in the period to accumulate strikes. So before it was an 18-month rolling period where an athlete could accumulate strikes, either missed tests or whereabouts failures. That period has now been reduced to 12 months, which is more favorable to athletes. So there's a shorter period of time to clear those strikes. In terms of therapeutic use exemption, not a huge change, but TUEs, the full TUE process will now be required for most athletes for use of prohibited substances or methods for medically justified reasons, of course. There will be the possibility for retroactive TUE in some circumstances, so in some sports and for some athletes. This will be defined and clearly identified on the CCS's website to make sure that everyone is on the same page. The code now has some arrangements in terms of mutual recognition. I know that it's often a frustration when an athlete gets a TU, the CCS needs to get a TU with their international federation, and it seems like doubling up of the process. So now, as long as the TUE meets all of the criteria that are defined in the standard, the other organization needs to recognize it. And in Canada, we have this thing called the medical review process. This will now only be available to student athletes, so CIS athletes or CCAA athletes. Testing. There is a new technical document. This has been in the works for a little bit. So WADA has came out with this document that basically establishes minimal levels of testing that need to happen in certain sports and certain disciplines, along with minimal levels and different types of analysis that are required in different sports and different disciplines. Again, the goal of this technical document is to focus on intelligent testing, which is a big theme of the new code and the new standards. So testing the right athletes at the right time for the right substances. What this means, though, is an increase in testing and an increase in blood testing, an increase in testing for EPO, an increase in testing for human growth hormone, which I'm sure you can imagine increases costs very significantly. There is also the concept of a national athlete pool. This national athlete pool will be identified by the CCS and the sport organization. This will be based on a number of criteria, so athletes that are part of national teams that participate in national championships, selection events, are part of the CCS's registered testing pool, are included in this kind of wider pool of athletes, which will be the focus of testing and investigations from the CCS. Does not mean that the CCS only focuses on that pool. Every athlete or member of a sport organization is subject to the rules of the Canadian Anti-Doping Program, can be subject to testing, but there's going to be more of a focus on that pool of athletes. A few things on results management, provisional suspensions. For most anti-doping rule violations, there's a mandatory provisional suspension in place. But under the new code, this provisional suspension can now be set aside under certain circumstances. So depending on the case, athletes can ask, or individuals who have been asserted an anti-doping rule violation can ask for this provisional suspension to be set aside. There are a number of criteria to meet, but it is there. Something to note in terms of the provisional suspension, the definition of provisional suspension is a bit broader. So before, if an athlete or an individual was provisionally suspended, it meant not taking part in competitions. Now they've expanded that definition to include competition and any other activity, which could mean being involved in the sport, training, anything. It's way broader. In terms of investigations, the CCS is now mandated to look at the athlete or the individual's entourage. So if someone commits an anti-doping rule violation, we now need to look to expand the circle where we look to see if there's other individuals that had been involved or were involved in this anti-doping rule violation. Again, this will mean a lot of work in terms of investigation, a lot of increased costs as well. In terms of sanctions, there are significant changes here, which we think are very good and reflect what WADA and what the CCS heard from the sport community. So for certain anti-doping rule violations like possession of a prohibited substance, use of a prohibited substance, the code now defines real cheater. There's a focus on if someone had an intention to cheat, the sanction will be harsher. So previously 2 years, now we move to 4 years for presence in the sample, like I said, possession, if there was intention to cheat. This will pose a bit of a challenge trying to demonstrate if there was intention to cheat, but that's a whole other kind of ball game. So as much as there are harsher sanctions, there is a greater flexibility for sanction reduction in a number of situations. For instance, we all know that supplements, contaminated products have been a big deal and a big problem. There is now provisions in there for a sanction to be reduced if the substance came from a contaminated product. Again, there are several criteria that will need to be met in order for that to happen, but at least we recognize that there is a problem with supplements and products being contaminated, so it is in there, and the potential for a sanction reduction can happen. There is also a number of areas where sanctions can be reduced if there's collaboration and substantial assistance. So we recognize that for our sport to be clean, we need increased collaboration. So for an athlete or an individual who would miss an anti-doping rule violation quickly could be the basis for a sanction reduction. If someone provides substantial assistance in finding out another anti-doping rule violation, if they were involved in the anti-doping rule violation, potentially an area where the sanction can be reduced. So all that to say here is that if there's a real intention to cheat, the sanction is higher. If there isn't, there's a lot of flexibility in terms of the length of the sanction. A few notes on hearings and appeals. So as you probably know, if the CCS or another anti-doping organization asserts an anti-doping rule violation, an athlete can either, or an individual, accept this anti-doping rule violation and the sanction, or proceed to a hearing. If they accept the sanction and the violation, typically they would sign a waiver saying, I'm accepting and I don't want to go to a hearing. So this is still in place. What will also be in place is the deemed waiver. So if an athlete or an individual does not participate in the process, does not respond to any letters, and we know that they've been informed and they are aware of the process, if they don't respond by the deadlines that have been set, we will consider that a deemed waiver, which means that they are waiving their right to proceed to a hearing, and we will assert the anti-doping rule violation and the sanction. As I mentioned before, in terms of sanctions, given there's a greater flexibility for the sanction length to vary, we do think that there will be a higher number of cases that go to a hearing. In terms of appeals, appeals are now kind of a new case. You can retry the whole case by going to an appeal. So that will be the case for us in Canada in terms of going to the SDRCC and the Doping Appeal Tribunal, and it's the same for the Court of Arbitration. So a whole new case. Given that's the case, we also think that the likelihood of athletes or individuals appealing will be higher. A few notes on public disclosure. A small change here, but just to make sure we're clear, what is public disclosure? Under the rules, we are mandated to publicly disclose the details around an anti-doping rule violation. So if someone commits an anti-doping rule violation, we need to publish it. It includes the anti-doping rule violation, the substance or method, if that's applicable, the name, the sport, and the consequences. At the CCS, what we do is, this is published on our website, it's on our registry, and there is a media release that goes out. There's now a bit of a discretion here in terms of public disclosure. So if the athlete is a minor, public disclosure is optional. And if we do decide, or another organization decides to publish, it needs to be proportionate. So proportionate to the anti-doping rule violation, the facts of the case. So a bit of discretion here. Statute of limitation has increased to 10 years. So before there was an 8-year window to proceed to an anti-doping rule violation. Now that window has been expanded to 10 years, simply to note. In terms of definitions, I will not go through all these definitions, but I just want to draw your attention to some significant definitions that are worth looking at in the CADP. The definition of athlete, consequences and provisional suspensions. Contaminated product, there's a new definition related to that. Fault, what does that mean? There's a definition related to that. No significant fault or no significant fault or negligence. There's a few kind of added conditions here if an athlete is a minor. And provisional hearings, which I mentioned earlier, that definition is broader and includes more than not being able to participate in competitions. So there are a lot of new changes. The CCS will work with sport organizations, with athletes to make sure that everyone is aware, one, that there's a new code coming into effect and what the Canadian Anti-Doping Program looks like and means for us in Canada. For all the athletes that will be included in the National Athlete Pool, there will be mandatory education sessions. We'll work with the sport to determine the best way. So far, we believe that to be done through e-learning, at least for the first year, and then the second year to make sure that we don't make you redo everything that you did the year before. We'll come up with a strategy to make sure that highlights any updates or changes that have occurred in the past year. And there will be also mandatory education for designated support personnel. So most likely support personnel that are closely linked to an elite team, national teams. We also want to make sure that they are well informed, know the anti-doping rules and the Canadian Anti-Doping Program. So in terms of next steps, so as I alluded to earlier, we will now be starting this adoption process. So from October to December, the CCS will meet with sport organization, review the Canadian Anti-Doping Program, the steps that need to be taken to adopt, what are our mutual responsibilities, what are the responsibilities of the sports, the responsibilities of the CCS, make sure it's clear. From an athlete perspective, as I mentioned, there will be education. There will also be clauses included in athlete agreements. Either it's going to be a new athlete agreement or included in the athlete agreement you have with your sport. And this is meant really to make sure that every athlete is aware that there is a Canadian Anti-Doping Program, of the rules that are in there, that they are subject to education, so to make sure that everyone is on the same page about anti-doping. And of course, this period will be really to make sure that everyone is familiar with the Canadian Anti-Doping Program, the rules, so that we're all ready for January 1st, 2015. And to conclude, just to leave you with a few remarks, I do want to stress that the code and the CADP are really there to protect clean athletes and protect clean sport, and that's really what we aim to do at the CCS with the sport organizations. The new code and the CADP, a number of the changes really focus on the concept of fairness, of intelligence, as I mentioned, testing the right athletes at the right time, looking at more than just one individual to make sure that if there is kind of a bigger problem in terms of doping, that is being looked at. And the concept of proportionality, which I do think is also important. So in terms of sanction, as I mentioned, for someone who really intends to cheat, the sanction is longer. But if there's a contaminated product, there's a possibility to reduce the sanction. So there's really this concept of proportionality that really is kind of across the code and across the CADP. And just to leave you with, of course, we are here to answer questions, help you understand the CADP. The CCS has a number of excellent resources on its website. The World Anti-Doping Agency has a number of excellent resources on their website. They just came out with 2 new resources, the athlete reference guide that explains the code, and also Ask the Athlete, where you can email, tweet, and their athlete committee will answer your question, which is kind of a cool concept. And of course, I will be here all day. I think I might be standing at a booth later on, so please feel free to come see me, and I'd be happy to chat in English or en français. Merci. Great, thank you. Good morning. I'm here to speak with you all about the Canadian Concussion Collaborative. And I'm not sure if many of you have heard of the Canadian Concussion Collaborative. Maybe some of you are very familiar with the Canadian Concussion Collaborative. And I think it's certainly a very hot media topic and certainly something that affects many sports, if not all sports. My role today is to share with you some of the information regarding the Canadian Concussion Collaborative. And I'm a spokesperson on behalf of the collaborative and representative from a physiotherapy perspective. So I'm an assistant professor and clinician scientist at the University of Calgary in the Sport Injury Prevention Research Center, and the focus on my research is on the prevention and management of concussion. And a lot of the information that I'll be sharing with you here today will discuss a little bit about the importance of concussion and why it matters, and I think a lot of you are already very familiar with that. Talk about the purpose of the collaborative, and then share with you a few take-home messages that you can take to your national sport organizations. So the Canadian Concussion Collaborative is a group of 9 health-related organizations that have come together with a purpose of promoting best practice in the prevention and management of sport-related concussion in sport. You can see there's a variety of different medical and health-related professional organizations that are included within this collaborative, as well as some educational initiatives, as well as the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport. CASM is the secretariat for the collaborative, and Dr. Pierre Fremont from Laval is the chair of the collaborative. You can visit the CASM website, and this provides you links to the different member organizations, and there's also a wealth of educational materials that you can access. So what is a concussion? Excuse me, and why is this important, and why is this important in sport? An estimated 1.8 million individuals in the US will be affected by concussion, with similar numbers in Canada. The majority of individuals will recover in 7 to 10 days. However, in some instances, symptoms can be prolonged, and I think if you take a moment, you can think of multiple different athletes that have been affected by concussion, some of which recover spontaneously over that initial 7 to 10 day period. Sometimes there's persistent symptoms and results in athlete retirement or prolonged time loss from play. And not only that, it can also affect a variety of different aspects of life, including school, work, outside activity. Concussion is the most commonly reported injury in the majority of youth sports, especially the high contact sports, and there's consistently believed to be a problem with underreporting of concussions, either because they're not recognized or potentially some of the athletes might not want to be affected by that concussion or report that concussion. So if we look at the actual definition, it's a brain injury defined as a complex pathophysiologic process that's induced by biomechanical forces. There's a variety of different ways that a concussion can occur, and it's also a multifaceted injury. So often no 2 athletes will present in the same fashion. There's a variety of different symptoms that can occur, and I'm sure a lot of you are aware of the different types of symptoms. Headache, dizziness, nausea, difficulty concentrating, trouble with memory, different signs that can occur. There may or may not be a loss of consciousness, and still there is a perception that you have to have a loss of consciousness in order to have had a concussion, but that's actually not the case. Individuals may be very dizzy or unsteady following a concussion, and I think you can probably, although I don't have any Speedo examples within this talk, you can probably imagine an athlete getting up following a concussive incident and being quite unsteady on their feet and have difficulty balancing and orienting themselves in space. Sleep disturbance, often there's difficulty sleeping, falling asleep, staying asleep, or extreme fatigue. Mood changes, oftentimes there is significant irritability, maybe people not being quite themselves. And cognitive changes, difficulty with memory, multitasking, difficulty remembering. And certainly you can imagine from an athlete's standpoint, integrating all these different cues and trying to function at an extremely high level can be quite difficult. And if we think of this from an elite sport standpoint, One great thing is that often you do have access to healthcare professionals and medical professionals that have knowledge in the area of concussion. But if you think down to the grassroots, that's not always the case. So part of what the collaborative looks at as well is how do we actually access that best possible medical care. It's also important to recognize that symptoms may evolve. So over the first 24 hours or so, those symptoms may come on gradually. They might not necessarily be present immediately following the incident. So recognizing that symptoms could occur over time and the importance of recognizing the potential of a concussive injury and then removing the athlete from participation in the case that that is suspected. So how does a concussion occur? There are a few different ways in which a concussion can occur. There could be a direct blow to the head. There could be a blow to the body, and then the head can come in contact with an object. A slip and fall, where an individual's head then comes in contact with the ground. Or an indirect blow, in which there's a blow to the body, and then the head snaps back and forth, as in a whiplash type incident. So there's no one specific mechanism of injury, but rather a group of injuries that can occur. So what do we know about recovery? We know that most people do recover in 7 to 10 days, but some individuals do have persistent symptoms. 31%, if we look at some of the NHL data and some of our more recent youth ice hockey data, we're looking at 72% of the youth that had time loss of greater than 10 days. And if you look at school-age children, 14% still have symptoms at the 3-month mark. So fairly high numbers. Persistent symptoms are not necessarily specific to concussion and often affect multiple dimensions, so need to be treated in a multidisciplinary way. So concussion does appear to be of significant public health burden and does have quite an effect from an athlete standpoint as well. So the purpose of the collaborative was to come together with a group of these 9 organizations to facilitate the best practice and management of concussion from a prevention standpoint and from a management and detection standpoint. Ultimately, preventing the injuries in the first place will result in less injuries, less time lost from sport, early detection so you can identify individuals that have been injured, and then implementing the best management strategies. So this document is published in the British Journal of Sport Medicine and it's open access. I do have copies in French and in English for you here. And it's only a 2-page document, so it's reader friendly. And there are 2 main recommendations that came from the collaborative. That sport organizations consider a concussion management protocol. So how many of you know if your association has a concussion management protocol in place right now? Okay, good. So fair number of you, which is excellent. Now, in a few slides, I'll talk a little bit about components that are believed to be important in that management protocol. And I want you to take home those messages and bring that back to your sport organization to see what exactly is included within that management protocol. The second recommendation was that multidisciplinary environments should be considered and should be involved in the concussion management program. Not all areas have access to physicians that have expertise from a concussion standpoint. Maybe that's from a grassroots program, maybe it's a remote area, but looking at different strategies that can help facilitate the best possible management from a concussion standpoint. So if we look at some of the recommendations for the first point that was made with the collaboration, a plan for a safe environment. So this can take on a variety of different pictures, and it's sport specific. Different sports will have different needs and different risks. So there are different risk factors for concussion within different sports. So having a good idea of rules that may change the risk of concussion. Some sports have limited the amount of contact in order to minimize the risk of concussion and looked at different ages in which contact is allowed, looking at the sporting environment, maximizing the safety of the actual environment in which the sport is performed. And there are many others that would be specific to different sports. Looking at a plan for education not only for the coaches, for the organization, but actually getting that down to the players, parents, athletes, and everyone within the organization
so that there's great education in terms of an ability to detect concussion and awareness of a protocol of return to play. The use of best practices, so looking at what is the best possible management protocol for individuals that have suffered a concussion and what kind of access is available within your sport. So partnering with local individuals. On a national level, there's often access to that medical care, but looking at from a local level and working with the provincial sport organizations and local sport organizations to help further define that. Access to tools and expertise. There are a lot of references on the CCC website that you can go to and you can link to, and the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport also has some references available for you if you would like to go and pursue that. And these educational tools can actually be used and have been very effective in creating awareness and education with respect to concussion. Review your protocols annually. Take a look at the protocols. There is certainly a lot of research coming out in the area of concussion that can then be further developed and help to develop these protocols to a higher level. So what does this mean for you? The Saskatchewan Soccer Association actually has a very thorough concussion management protocol in place already, and it includes a variety of different aspects of concussion management. A lot of people think of management as the protocol of rest followed by return to play, and let's make that return to play very sport specific. But it's not only that return to play. It's also looking at risk, also looking at education, and every aspect that can be involved from a concussion standpoint. So this is a great example, and if you go to the Saskatchewan Soccer Association website and look under their policies and procedures, there's a risk management section, and you can actually read this. It's only a couple of pages, but it's quite well done. So in terms of take-home messages, it's important to take into account the importance of a concussion management protocol to minimize the risk and the risk of injury as well as the risk of prolonged symptoms in concussion. Have a discussion with your boards about the protocols that are currently in place and potential areas where these could maybe be improved. And encourage your board to consider a concussion management protocol. Ultimately, we want to minimize the number of new concussions, maximize the detection of concussions that do occur, and facilitate the best practice management so that we minimize the impact of this injury to the athletes. Kristen Ray is a contact at the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport, and she has a wealth of references that are available for you and that can help you with this process. So if you would like further information, you're more than welcome to contact Kristen. I'm happy to be in contact with you as well. But she has a lot of the educational materials and has a lot of the policy and procedure information that you may be interested in. Thank you very much.
Now I am going to take this off. Thanks very much. We have some time for some questions, if there are questions. So for either presenter, either Karine about CCS or Catherine for the concussion collaboration. Any questions? Yes, more than one. All right.
There's a mic. Here's the mics.
Oh, there are mics. I just want to get this thing moving. My goal is to get this microphone moving. So yeah, please go up to a mic and name and sport. Yes, exactly.
Thea Cully, field hockey. So this is to do with the new anti-doping. Last night we briefly touched on that one of the new policies that you're looking to implement is to share our information with the Canadian Border Services and law agencies. And if you could just explain more about that and maybe why that's necessary or looked at to being necessary.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know.
I think in terms of working with border services and police or authorities, it's more that we would have an agreement where they share information with us that can inform anti-doping. In terms of us sharing information with them, it would be very limited, and we are restricted by privacy and policy, the protection of personal information and privacy, which we adhere to in terms of Canadian legislation, and we also have an international standard that comes from the code as well that deals with personal information and privacy of information. So in terms of border services and authorities, it's more they would share information with us. So if they seize steroids in Montreal, not just as an example, we would be informed that there's tons of steroids in Montreal, and we'd be able to kind of look into whether this is affecting athletes and is part of the sporting environment as opposed to the other way around. Does that answer your question? Right.
Without fully understanding what the clause actually says and how that affects us. And I mean, I'm not well versed in privacy policy either. So it's just a topic that I feel a little bit in the dark about. And then knowing that you're going into the implementation phase and the adoption phase with January 1st feels like, okay, well, if this is something that's going to infringe on my privacy, it really doesn't give me a lot of time to figure out what I do about it. How do I go about making change? You feel a little handcuffed with, if it is, but just in the dark.
Yep. Well, we can certainly make sure that we provide more clarification and information around what that means in particular. But like I said, I think the main part is that we receive information. Like we want to collaborate with border services and authorities to get information. The flow of information the other way, so from the CCS and your information going to them, would be very unlikely and would happen in very kind of particular situations, but we can certainly clarify what that would mean. But aside from border services or authorities, I mean, as part of ADAMS and the kind of global anti-doping movement, there is sharing of anti-doping information, but not personal information.
Jeannie, weightlifting. You flew to Whitehorse a couple times to test me.
Hi.
So speaking of expensive stuff, how much is this going to cost, like this new program? How much is it going to cost above and beyond?
Above and beyond what we currently receive, what we currently do. We are estimated that it's going to cost upwards of, let me get those right in English, 860,000, donc $860,000 approximately. And a lot of those costs are coming from the technical documents. So as I mentioned, increased testing, increased analysis, increased need for investigations, higher number of hearings and appeals potentially, because there's a lot of flexibility in terms of reducing sanctions, and because if an athlete or an individual is not happy with the outcome of the hearing, they can take the case to get, they can seek an appeal, which would be kind of a totally new case as opposed to before you could only appeal in certain situations.
So where does that cost get absorbed?
Where does that cost get absorbed? So this is where the CADP has introduced the adoption contribution, where we are looking for sports to participate in helping with the cost of delivering this anti-doping program.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Hi, Carolyn from snowboarding. Actually, it has to do with funding. I'm just wondering, you said that you have you're increasing the funding from sport, and or you're asking sport to provide funding to CCES, and I'm just wondering what that means for us in terms, like, what does it mean for Snowboard Canada? What does it mean for Wrestling Canada? What does it mean for all these? And what I want to know is it proportional to, there are sports that are a little bit more targeted in terms of number of testing that you're going to do. Some of them are more, they're blood tests. For snowboarding, it's usually urine tests, and it's usually a few times a year. So is it going to be proportional to the sport? Just elaborate a little bit on that, I guess.
Sure.
Thank you.
So every sport will be asked to contribute. The level of the amount of the contribution is proportionate to the size of the sport, not necessarily the services received, because we want to, going forward, we want this meaningful and effective anti-doping program and the same services to be provided to every sport. But in terms of this adoption contribution, it will not be the same amount for every sport, given there's different realities to take into consideration. So it is outlined in the CADP which sport need to provide which amount, and it will be an ongoing discussion with the CCS, Sport Canada, and the sports to figure out the best way forward. And of course, we are open to other ideas to get this funding that we need to fill this gap. We are trying to see if provincial governments would like to kind of join in this effort. The CCS has been working hard to try to get corporate sponsorship, but so far we have been unsuccessful in getting the corporate to join forces with us in terms of anti-doping. So that has been difficult. We do have a business development area, which I'm part of, where we offer all good. Where we offer services to other national anti-doping organizations, other international federations. So this amount of money that we receive, we put back into our Canadian system to help that. But we are still faced with this gap that we need to fill to be able to be code compliant and meet all of the requirements. And if I can maybe make one last point, this funding is really to address the requirements that need to be implemented in Canada for us, for a sport to be code compliant, and is not to go over and above all of the requirements that we have to do. So this is to give us a code compliant program in 2015. In terms of the adoption contribution, like the lack of.
Well, either the funding or even the information sharing, is that something that can change until before January 1st, or is that a for sure thing? That's when it's put it on video.
Well, the information sharing thing is more. It's less of a policy, and again, I can make sure that I'll bring this back to the office, and that we can issue perhaps some FAQs to clarify what that means. It's really more because we have to do a lot of investigations now in a number of certain situations. We need to collaborate with border services and authorities, and again, to stress that point, it's information coming to the CCS as opposed to CCS giving information. So we can clarify what that means for sure. In terms of the adoption contribution, should we receive $1 million from a corporate sponsorship, this adoption contribution would be no longer needed. So we are still working to get other funding until we get to that point. This is the best solution that collectively we have come up with, but it can certainly change, and if by next year we get sponsors, then that can be eliminated or reduced for sure. Does that answer? Okay.
First off, I want to thank about the concussions. It's a major issue with athletes of all ages. But with respect to the CCS, as a business person and high-level sort of thinking there, I wonder how much of it has been done. Initially with Becky Scott and the efforts of our peers of athletes, there was a huge drive in Canada to be world leaders, and we were world leaders. Now, amongst athletes, we feel that our privacies and rights within Canada are so limited that convicted criminals have more rights. And to a certain point that at a high level thinking how many, maybe it's a testament to how well it's worked or how well it isn't working or how much it's needed. And I think that needs to be looked at. I understand you're in some issues with co-compliance, but as a business person, I don't see the business model there. We had a Congress last year, our head coach in HPD couldn't afford to go to if the CPC wasn't paying for it. For you to expect us to pay, and really at the end of the day for the NSO to pay, it's coming out of Sport Canada anyway, quite frankly, which at the end of the day affects us at the bottom of the line. We're starting to look at people and how they're getting paid and how much money you're getting, and that your jobs are really invented because of us. So as athletes, we're looking at our rights. They're being taken away as just human beings in comparison to what we should be hailed as world leaders and a clean doping nation, perhaps from your works or perhaps from us and our cultural beliefs. And then the high-level thinking of who's held accountable, are you guys held accountable, who are making these decisions for the finances, and how relative is it to today's landscape of the high-level thinking? Like, how many in this room want a microchip in them so that you can read where we are in the blood level of our hemoglobin every day? Like, if that's what it takes and that's what's cheaper, then do it. But you know what I mean? That's where you're at. And personally, as someone who represents athletes, I think it's asinine what you're doing to us. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Patrick Gorse. I'm a former orienteering athlete and now medical student, and I have a specific question for the CCES. So as a little background, one of the most common psychiatric conditions for children in the United States and Canada, and some would say mental disability, is ADD, ADHD. And I was just wondering if the CCES has ever considered the role of treatment for this condition in the TUE process. So specifically, one of the commonest treatments for this is one of the stimulants on the banned substance list. And I was just wondering what, and probably somebody else here knows the answer to this, and I have a follow-up depending on what the answer is, but I was wondering if it is possible to get an exemption for that stimulant?
So any substance that's on the prohibited list, but most of them can get a therapeutic use exemption for valid reasons. So
right.
ADHD medication is one example of that.
Mm-hmm. So then I guess, so the follow-up question for that in that case then is that given that 7% of individuals in Canada suffer from this, I was just curious. I was curious what the take is on the possible overprescription of this medication as well, which is commonly an issue encountered in medical literature and public health in general. Has that ever been something that's considered by the CCES?
Not specifically. Like we were not at the point where we would be working with the medical community to understand if there's too much prescription of ADHD. For us, our process is really if it meets the criteria and this substance is required from a medically justified reason,
right.
Then our therapeutic use exemption committee reviews it and can provide approval or non.
Fair enough. Thanks. It's just an interesting thing to reflect on. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Jeff Christie from Luge and the chair of the COC Athletes Commission. Just when it comes to athlete representation, I want everyone to know that Andrea Morin, who's part of our COC commission, is on the WADA steering committee for this over the last 2 years and is actually in South Korea right now. So we do have athlete voice within Canada there. And so it is getting pushed back down to the CCES. Whether there's issues still around that, we do have an athlete there kind of speaking on our behalf. My question is more around the concussion side. Some great work to deal with kind of getting back to play and how to manage it now. I'm wondering if the CCC's ever looked into the long-term possibilities of concussions when these types of protocols weren't in place. So how are athletes who weren't managed in the proper way, is there any research going into the what could be the future for our brains?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think that's a great question and certainly a hot topic of debate. And the answer is the literature isn't there yet. And there's certainly lots of studies going on looking at the longer term ramifications and trying to measure some of the factors associated with prolonged recovery. And the challenge is the difficult injury to study because it is heterogeneous and there are multiple factors involved. And the literature currently doesn't have high-level studies that actually look at prospectively what some of those effects are. So hopefully in the coming years, we'll have some literature to better evaluate that. On the way, but in progress. Actually, in Calgary right now, we are doing a 5-year study looking at youth ice hockey players, and it's one of the first studies that can actually look at the same group of people over time and measure changes and measure some of, well, what are actually 4 or 5 years out, what are some of the characteristics that we might see in these younger athletes as they're developing, but it's a starting point, and there are numerous other studies as well at other centers being conducted in a similar fashion so that we can have really solid evidence in terms of what might actually be some of those longer term ramifications. And that, I think, brings up the point too that it's important to actually revisit some of these protocols and different mandates from a concussion standpoint as the literature evolves, because things may change as we learn more and more about concussion. Thank you for your question.
Hello, my name is Etienne Morneau, sprint kayaking. I have a question for CCES. Would it be possible to have like athletes getting caught, pay a fine, like implement some kind of fine? That could be a good source of revenues, or is this not possible?
You mean, so if someone tests positive, there's a fine? We did actually look at that and discuss that extensively with sport during the 2 consultation period. It kind of came off the table, and I mean, there's always the chance to have another look at it, but that it was kind of more of a negative incentive as opposed to kind of wanting to be, proactive and positive. But it is a suggestion that was looked at and could potentially be re-looked at. Thank you.
Hello, Craig Bunton, figure skating. I just had a question regarding the collaboration with CCES and Canada Border Services Agency. Is there any precedence outside of sport? I mean, are there any companies that work with their employees with in that same kind of capacity, or is this strictly athletes? Is it the first time that anybody has this type of collaboration?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I can comment on other areas. I mean, in terms of anti-doping, if you recall the Lance Armstrong and a lot of the doping violations that came out of cycling, there was a lot of collaboration with Border Services Authority and police, for instance, where they had seized a large number of prohibited substances and involved anti-doping organizations to make sure that if it was related to sport, there was some consequences in sport. So I think there's kind of some precedent in that area, but I can't really comment on, work or other areas.
Yeah, I think if memory serves, those drugs were illegal though. So my question.
Yeah,
I'm
good point. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, if the drugs aren't necessarily illegal, look, I'm all for clean sport and everything, but I do agree with Tyler that having less rights is a scary thing, and yeah, I think
in terms of less right, that's certainly not our goal, not the goal of the code or the CCS or the CADP. All of your points are well taken. We will comment on the privacy, and yeah, your point is well taken in terms of if it's a criminal offense, and that's really where we want to be involved, because right now we wouldn't know about it. So if there's illegal substances that are seized that involve athletes, we wouldn't be aware of it. Unless we can have some sort of collaboration or unless someone comes forward. So it's more from that perspective and trying to know of those situations that impact sport on a kind of criminal basis.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Danielle from Softball Canada. I just have a question regarding the funding, and if you go ahead and move into an area where sport is then funding or helping to fund these programs, are you then willing, you had said that you weren't sure if it was any hearings would increase or that kind of thing, and so this budget is kind of built out to accommodate that or being able to solve those problems. So if you, in a year, say nothing changes and then you ask the organizations to participate, in a year, are you giving us the right or the organizations the right to see where that money was used and if and when it was necessary? And then if you have to bring back the budget or adjust the budget in a case. I just don't know, I guess, how bad Sport Canada or how athletes are, what the rate is of cases that you face. And so I guess I just want to know, like, is there really a doping problem in Canada, and is the answer $860,000?
There are a lot of unknowns, like you bring up a good question. This number is not just coming out of thin air, the 860. It is based on all of those things that I mentioned, and also providing this meaningful and effective program to every sport organization in Canada, which I'd mentioned before. In 2009, a lot of organizations were receiving little to no services, which is no longer a possibility. So there are a lot of for sure's where the costs are way significantly higher. there are some unknowns in terms of hearings and appeals. And it is the first year, so we will need to continue the discussion, adjust, and see really how it unfolds at the end of the year and where we are next year in terms of whether the same is needed or less or no, because we have found other kind of funding solutions.
Right, and so will that be transparent to athletes?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
That's for you. That's for you.
Yeah, thanks so much. And thank you. So I think one of the things we've just witnessed is this is a forum, and it's a forum for discussion, and it's a forum for respectful discussion. And I think with regards to CCS, we're going to definitely be looking forward to that FAQ. I think the concern is everyone in this room, definitely everyone in this room, is all for a clean sport and making sure it's as clean as possible. But the idea of already having to say where we are 24 hours a day and all the rest, and then the idea that information even could be shared with law authorities, my take on it always is in law you're innocent till proven guilty, and I've always found that this is the opposite a little bit. Is like almost like you're assumed guilty, not really, and I know that isn't the case, but the feeling is, you know, we need all this stuff because we're assuming people are cheating, and even if that's the case, it's a tough question and one that never sits right and needs to be worked on. So I definitely think we'll all look forward to that FAQ, and we can, at AthletesCAN, make sure when that comes out, when the information about how information will be shared comes out, we can share that with all of you so you can share it with your athletes back home. I think it's really important. We are like right on time, which is, yes, yeah, I know, yes. Sorry, Mr. Peterson, but that wasn't nice. So now we're not on time because I'm lost. Presentation and Q&A, that's happened. Speed dating, yes, it's my favorite activity. This is an opportunity to learn about some of the programs and services we've talked about and ask some more questions. It's also a chance to stretch your legs. And so what'll happen is, oh, there we go. Each table don't have a number, I don't think, do we? But you have the name. Tables have numbers. Buddy groups, sure. Okay. So anyway, Tom Hall, my table, 2, awesome, is heading to the AthletesCAN thing in the other room.
Yes. So the buddy group.
Yeah.
You see the buddy group leaders' names on the screen, so you know which group you're in.
Yeah.
And then you look across to your starting station. So Tom's group is starting at the AthletesCAN table, and all of your other respective tables based on your group.
Yeah.
And then we'll just rotate every 4 minutes. You'll just keep going to the next one, and the next one, and the next one.
Yes, it is fast. 4 minutes. It's quick. Ask questions, get the info. The people will be here for the most part. And we have to be back here at 11 a.m. sharp. Really sharp. Extra sharp. Razor sharp.